So, as you might have guessed, unions are now in Rush Duels. This is actually the first ability that was added since flip monsters in Rush Duels aren't, flips. Instead, they have their activations baked into the requirements. So with our first super ability, of course Konami has to debut them with none other than the OG, the classic, the best of the best. Call up Kaiba cause the XYZ monsters finally make their way into Rush Duels. Hello everyone, my name is Protagonist, you can call me Protag, and I'm back with another episode of Rush Review. This is a series where I go over decks and themes to help introduce them to people who might want to learn about Rush, or for those that might want to try something new. If you're a fan of the Yugioh manga and anime, then I'm sure you recognize the cards. The XYZ monsters are a series of light machines that can mix and match into a variety of different fusion monsters. However, compared to the TCG, these cards do work a little differently here in Rush Duels. First off, Rush introduces a new mechanic called Union Fusion. This means you can fusion summon by sending the correct face-up cards from your field to the bottom of your deck in any order. Since banishment does not exist in Rush Duels, sending cards to the bottom of the deck is the closest thing they have. It's just nice that there's a keyword this time around. Secondly, and I honestly can't believe this wasn't a thing in the TCG, is that each of the 2-piece level 6 fusions like XY Dragon Cannon can be treated as its individual materials for the fusion summon of XYZ Dragon Cannon. It's super convenient and honestly super helpful for the deck. So with all that in mind and a whole carrier full of new machines, it's time to dive into these monsters and see how we can build up a win. And stick around to the end of the video and I'll reveal a basic deck list and play some games to help showcase the deck. Starting off, we have the originals. X-Head Cannon is now the legend monster with the highest attack, which will scare people. For some reason, it can be aggressive, but surely there are better plays you can make than just playing all 3 and passing. Y Head Dragon and Z Metal Tank on the other hand are our first union monsters in the game. If you aren't aware on how they work, no worries. In Yu-Gi-Oh, a union monster must first be summoned normally, and then you can activate its effect to equip onto a monster. Simple enough, but because you have to summon it normally, you do run the risk of it being destroyed or affected by your opponent's traps. Y-Head Dragon can equip itself to a face-up X-Head Cannon or fusion monster that mentions it as material on the field as an equip spell with the following effect. The equipped monster gains 400 attack and defense. Z Metal Tank can be equipped onto a face-up X-Head Cannon, Y Dragon Head, or a fusion monster that mentions either of those cards as material on your field as an equip spell with the effect. This equipped monster gains 600 attack and defense. Fans of these cards might notice that the destruction prevention effect is missing here, but as a trade-off increases the number of targets each monster can equip to. While I would have loved the protection, I also think that the enhanced modularity is a strong buff. Aside from the original X, Y, and Z, we also have the addition of the trial cards. These retrains all name change, but they provide additional utility to help facilitate the fusion summoning. X Trial Cannon needs you to mill 2, and aside from the name change to X Head Cannon, allows you to add a Y Trial Dragon or Z Trial Tank from your grave to your hand. However, you can't special summon non-light monsters for the rest of the turn. Y Trial Dragon after you mill 1 changes its name to Y Dragon Head. Then you can fusion summon a XY Dragon Cannon or YZ Tank Dragon by placing monsters from your field and or grave to the bottom of the owner's deck as material, including this card. And finally, we have Z Trial Tank. By sending the top card of your deck to the grave, this card's name becomes Z Metal Tank. Then you can fusion summon XZ Tank Cannon or YZ Tank Dragon by placing monsters from your hand and or grave to the bottom of your owner's deck in any order as material, including this card. But we also can't forget about Union Supporter. By milling 1 and declaring either X-Head Cannon, Y Dragon Head, or Z Metal Tank, this card's name becomes the declared name for the turn. Then you can special summon a level 6 Light Machine Fusion monster from your grave to your field in face-up defense position. It's nice that we have so many name changers though, right? So now we can actually talk about the fusions, starting with the level 6s. Like I mentioned before, each fusion can be treated as the 2 materials that were used to make the fusion monster for the Union Fusion of XYZ Dragon Cannon. XY Dragon Cannon can destroy a face-up spell card on your opponent's field. It's good to remove field spells, equip spells, and now can actually target Union monsters when they are equipped to other cards. XZ Tank Cannon can destroy a face-down spell trap card on your opponent's field if you pitch a card from your hand to the grave. And then YZ Tank Dragon also needs you to pitch 1, and then you can destroy a face-down monster on your opponent's field. However, last but not least is not just 1, but 2 XYZ Dragon Cannons. How's that possible? Well, let's get into it. XYZ Dragon Cannon can be Union Fusion by placing a face-up X-Head Cannon, Y Dragon Head, and Z Metal Tank on your field to the bottom of your deck in any order as material. Then, if you send a card from your hand to the grave, you can destroy a card on your opponent's field. We also have the brand new YXZ Cannon Dragon. This can also be Union Fusion the same way, but this card's name becomes XYZ Dragon Cannon while in the extra deck, just to make things easier. On the main phase, this card is fusion summoned. You can special summon a level 8 light machine from your grave face up to the field. This is mainly for any XYZ or YXZ that might have been sent to the grave previously for some extra removal and damage. So with all the monsters out of the way, it's time to see what spells can help us make our big machines. Starting off, we have Searching Union. Take the bottom 5 cards of your deck and show them. You can then add up to 2 X Head Cannon, Y Dragon Head, and or Z Metal Tank from among the cards shown to your hand. The rest are shuffled back. Depending on the ratios, this can be a viable spell to rip on the first turn, or an incredible extender after you perform your Union fusions to get the same pieces back again. Product Union can add back an X Head Cannon, Y Dragon Head, or Z Metal Tank from your grave to the hand. Then you can look at an opponent's face down back row card. If it's a trap card, you can destroy it. You would think this is useful, but when most of your cards go back to the deck and not the graveyard, this is probably not a card you want to see often. However, we can't just rely on these cards to win. Let's take a look at some more support, both new and old, to help us. Durham the Holy Empress is the newest generic support for decks that rely on unions and field spells, similar to how Lichy the Hopeful was for rituals. During the turn that you normal summon this card, send the top 3 cards of your deck to the grave. Then you can add a union monster or a field spell from your grave to your hand. If you do, send a monster from your field or a card from your hand to the grave. Cyber Variation has been such a key card for light machines that of course you have to add it to the deck. If you have 10 or more cards in your deck, place a face-up light machine from your field to the bottom of the deck. Then you can draw 2 cards, but you can only special summon machines for the rest of the turn. This now synergizes super well with the XYZ cards because you can add cards back from the bottom of the deck thanks to Searching Union. And honestly, I think Departure Zone works really well for the deck. Activate this field spell by milling 2, except for the first turn of the player going first. Just to be clear, this means that you cannot activate this card on the first turn if you're going first in the duel, but it can at least be set to open up some hand space. Anyway, when this card is finally face up in the field zone, this card cannot be destroyed by card effects, and during the draw phase of a player that has this card in their field zone, if they would draw until they have 5 cards in their hand for a normal draw, instead they will draw until they have 6. You can never go wrong with more cards, and that gives you more chances to get your fusions online, but this is also allowing you to have a second target for Durham if you run her. Since all the main deck monsters are level 4, running Legend Strike can help out a lot. Pay 300 life points and you can special summon a level 4 monster with 1600 or less attack, or a normal legend monster from your grave face up to the field. If you special summon Legendary Magician or a legend normal monster by this effect, you can destroy an opponent's spell trap card. This can be another way for you to revive any pieces that might be in the graveyard, so it could be a decent add. Okay, so here's the deck list we're working with today. Starting off, we have 3 copies of X Head Cannon, and then here's some tech choices that I decide to add. Animagica Shooter is here because it's a really good card to help extend your plays in case, you have you just brick on your hands and you cannot make any of your fusion monsters. You can tribute this card in attack position by tributing 1 light attribute monster. During the main phase that you normal or special summon this card, you can change the battle position of one monster on your opponent's field. Then you can destroy a face-up monster on your opponent's field with a level lower than this card. This will hit most targets obviously, but this is just a really nice thing to have in case you brick. Now, Asa is basically the same thing, but a little bit better in my opinion. During the main phase that you normal or special summon this card, send 1 monster from your hand or field to the grave. Send the top card of your deck to the grave, and you can special summon a level 5 or lower monster from your grave face up to the field, and you cannot activate this effect again for the rest of the turn. So kind of like Animagica Shooter, you can play this card if you don't have any good plays in your hand, or use this as extension to hopefully, do the same play again with some other cards and, do some crazy stuff. It's a really good card. You should add it. And then after that, we have 3 copies of Y Dragon Head, Z Metal Tank, and then 3 copies of all the other trial cards as well. Union supporters at 3 because, oh my god, who doesn't love, name changers? For Legend Monster, we are adding Card Trooper. It's just a good card. You could replace this with something else. I'm not entirely sure what you would replace this with, if I'm being quite honest. Oh, you could replace this with Caius. Caius is a good option here as well. I already talked about it here in the side deck, so we'll go over it later. For our spell cards, we have 2 copies of Legend Strike, 2 copies of Curse of the Rising Light, 1 copy of Jest, 3 copies of Searching Union, 2 copies of Product Union, 3 copies of Cyber Variation, and of course, Pot of Greed as our legend spell. That does mean we are only running Treacherous Trap Hole for our legend trap, but it's a really good piece of removal, so how can I say no? Our extra deck is only like this because I thought, oh, maybe you could also add the Cyber Dragons in here, and you don't get me wrong, you can do that, but I just wanted to put it in here as an option because I didn't really talk about it before in the video. As for the actual useful cards, we have 3 copies of XYZ Dragon Cannon, 2 copies of YXZ Cannon Dragon, 3 copies of XZ Tank Cannon, 2 copies of XY Dragon Cannon, and YZ Tank Dragon. Now, these ratios aren't the best. Like I said, you can remove the Chimera text and the other Cyber Dragon stuff since you're not really playing it. Replace it with the copies that I'm missing here, and you're good to go. And for the side deck, like I mentioned before, Caius is really good. I put Elemental Hero Prisma here if you really are just not seeing your Union fusions go out. And then the final copy of Curse of the Rising Light, if it's that big of a deal. Power Bond is surprisingly good if you want to run it for fun. You know, you can really get some high attack monsters if you do it this way. Heartbeat's Feather Duster, because back removal is critical, and it's not something that you are going to be able to do often. Sorry, on that note, Barrage of Steel is here. And then, like I mentioned, Departure Zone, because I thought it was a really good card. 3 copies of Star Salvation Shield, because you are running light monsters for the most part. That does mean that you have to run different legend spells, obviously, so we are running the usual Storming Mirror Force, Torrential Tribute, and Compulse, just for the funds. Alright, that'll be it. Let's jump into some games and see how the deck plays out. Okay, so now we're going to look at a replay of a match that I had with a Monumentis player. I start with Supporter and declare X Head Cannon, allowing me to summon Y Dragon Head and Z Metal Tank to make XYZ Dragon Cannon. Then I tribute it for Asa and use the effect to bring back the Supporter from the grave. Searching Union allows me to get the Y Dragon Head and Z Metal Tank back to my hand. Supporter changes its name to X Head Cannon, and with Y and Z in hand, I make YXZ Dragon Cannon, which I then use to revive the XYZ in grave, ending on my 2 boss monsters. My opponent starts with shipping the Goraliath to draw 2, getting them a Pot of Greed to draw another 2 cards. Balloon Bhatia is played and gets Durham, Sarcophagus is then used to summon the Goraliath, and a second one gets the other one. Yorishiro cycles back the Sark and they set 2 and pass. I start with destroying a back row with XYZ Dragon Cannon and then just remove both Goraliath on the field to draw 2. I Searching Union again to get Y and Z and use Y to equip onto XYZ, and Cyber Variation draws 2 at the cost of Z. This nets me Card Trooper to mill and draw, and that gets me Z Trial Tank, which lets me fusion summon XZ Tank Dragon, who then destroys the last back row. This also gives me all the pieces on the board to Union Fuse one more time to make XYZ Dragon Cannon, and I go in for the attack. They start with Card Trooper, and unfortunately they hit nothing as they set everything and pass. I start with removing the back row with my 2 XYZ and tribute 1 for Asa, but that is met with the Spirit of Assyria, preventing the effect activation. However, that's enough for me to go in for the attack and win the game. Game 2, my opponent starts by sending 5 and pass. I don't get a good start either, as my Y Trial Dragon gets spirited and leaves it dead on the field. Thankfully, I do have an Asa to bring it back and use its effect to mill and name change. Then I Union Summon with the X Head Cannon to make XY Dragon Cannon, and Searching Union gets me another X and Y piece. This will make me another XY Dragon Cannon, but that's enough for my opponent as they Torrential to remove everything. All I have left is X Head Cannon, and I hit face. Next turn, they ship Lyagon and Pot of Greed to draw even more. Headhunter's Lemur Cunning sends my fusions back to the extra deck, and Sark revives the Lyagon in the grave. They play Justiciar and Yorishiro, who brings back the Sark and is used to summon the Goraliath that was just milled. Lyagon eats the Yorishiro as a buff, and they hit through my board. Oh my god, what is this hand? I start with Y Trial Dragon and it gets spirited, which is really bad since I don't actually have follow-up. All I can do is X Trial, make XY Dragon Cannon, equip Y Dragon Head to buff it enough, and play the X Trial Cannon as another body. I hit over the Lyagon and end my turn. On their turn, they have the Apocalypse Field spell, which isn't good for me. Yorishiro gets back Sark and both monsters make a Lyagon, and the Durham is used as cost for Sark to bring back the Goraliath, who then revives the Emir in grave, which is more than enough to end me. Game 3 starts off with Pot of Greed and Y Trial Dragon and Z Metal Tank, getting me YZ Tank Dragon. Y Trial Dragon gets summoned and Legend Strike gets the milled Supporter, declaring X Head Cannon. This gives me the materials to Union Summon XYZ Dragon Cannon. Y Dragon Head equips itself onto XYZ and I set 1 and pass. Once again, my opponent doesn't have a good hand, so they table set and pass. I start with Cyber Variation to pitch the Y Trial Dragon and draw 2. After Card Troopering, I Curse of the Rising Light to flip a monster to attack and play Z Trial Tank to make another XYZ Dragon Cannon. The first one gets tributed for Asa, who brings back the X Trial Cannon to get nothing, and Searching Union gets me the last 2 pieces I need to make YXZ Cannon Dragon to then bring back the XYZ. Both XYZ clear out the back row, and I curse again to flip another monster face up before clearing the rest of their board. My opponent starts with Jundee to mill and draw 1. Beastblader hits the field and mills more while buffing itself. Another Jundee is played to mill even more, but then those 2 get tributed for Emir. However, the attack isn't enough to clear over the fusion, so they just have to set 1 and pass. This basically seals the deal for me, as the first XYZ destroys the Blader and I Product Union to see the back row, which wasn't a trap. I honestly should have done that first, but never punished. That's enough confirmation for me that I can just attack through and win the game. GG's. XYZ is really easy to play. With more ways to make the fusions and good removal all around, it's no wonder the deck has been seeing some wins in tournaments. Now, is it good enough to win against the top decks? Maybe. It can take some wins for sure, but zombies and even spar cards are still consistent and can easily remove the high level fusions on the crackback. But for beginner players, I think this is just a really good pickup. Hopefully we can see more fusions in the future. Like, give me a ZXY or ZYX fusion? What would that even look like? But honestly, the monsters just need some protection at the very least. That could be in the form of another high-level fusion, or it could be a little guy, kinda like how Card Defender works for hero decks. Anyway, that'll be it for me today. Thank you so very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video or learned something new, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Leave a comment on your opinions of the deck, and I will see you all next time. Peace.